Gamers, it is time to bow down to our Redmond, Washington overlords. Microsoft has finally acquired Activision Blizzard after the deal was approved by regulators in the UK. This deal cost almost $70 billion, which I think is the biggest acquisition in the history of gaming, which means that Microsoft now owns a massive part of the industry. If you take a look here, Microsoft actually owns a ton of studios already. So they acquired ZeniMax, which is the parent company of Bethesda, for $7.5 billion. So Microsoft already owns The Elder Scrolls, Fallout, Wolfenstein, Doom, Quake, and some other games. They now acquired Activision Blizzard, which of course includes Blizzard, Treyarch, Infinity Ward, some other studios. So that has a lot of IP associated with it as well, right? You've got the Call of Duty games, you've got the whole World of Warcraft franchise, Diablo, Hearthstone, Overwatch, everything else that Blizzard does. Uh, and of course, the studios they already had. Rare, which used to be popular, but I don't know what they've done recently. I guess Sea of Thieves is probably their most recent game. Of course, they own 343. They acquired Mojang as well, which, of course, again, owns the Minecraft IP, and a few other studios as well. So Microsoft really is in a very powerful position at this point in the gaming industry. But this deal did come with some drawbacks. Microsoft had to concede some things in order to get the UK regulator to agree. So, in particular, there's some language about game streaming, which is actually quite interesting. So, Microsoft had to give up the streaming rights for their games, specifically for the Activision Blizzard games, to Ubisoft, which is quite interesting because if we scroll down here, it leads to this very strange situation where outside of the EU, Ubisoft owns the rights to streaming Activision Blizzard games, which means that they'll license Microsoft's games back to them for Xbox Cloud Gaming, which just sounds kind of strange. Like, Microsoft publishes the game, and then Ubisoft automatically owns the rights to that game, and then they license it back to Microsoft for streaming on their own platform. That sounds like a very convoluted way of doing things, and I'm not sure exactly why it was done this way, but apparently it made the UK regulators happy, and that's what it took to close the deal. So this deal has been going on for a while, 20 months at this point. I think it started in January 2022 is when it was first announced, and it finally closed. So, of course, there were objections from the FTC, which is in the United States, as well as the UK authorities and some regulatory authorities in the EU as well. And all these legal challenges are actually why this deal took so long to close. So, Bobby Kotick, the CEO of Activision Blizzard, announced this news to employees today in this letter, saying that the regulatory in the UK has finally approved this transaction with Microsoft, which of course is a very corporate way of saying what happened. But yeah, that's the gist of it. This deal finally closed, and Microsoft now owns Activision Blizzard. I think they own King as well. So if we actually take a look at the breakdown in revenue of Activision Blizzard, we can see here, this data is from 2021, so it's not the most recent, but we can see that actually King makes up a pretty significant chunk of the revenue of this company. Of course, King makes mobile games, if you're not aware. As far as I know, their most popular one is Candy Crush, which, I mean, you can just imagine how much profit that brings in for them. But yeah, that division actually makes up even more than Blizzard, which is very interesting at this point. And of course, as part of this deal, well, maybe not as part of the deal, but related to that, the CEO of Activision Blizzard, Bobby Kotick, is going to leave in December. He's only going to stay until the end of the year. I'm not sure exactly why. I know Microsoft kind of wanted him gone after all of the sexual harassment allegations that were taking place within Activision Blizzard under his lead. We have some more details of that here. So, yeah, there's been a very big controversy. The state of California sued Activision Blizzard. Well, I guess just Activision, alleging a culture of constant sexual harassment, which, of course, is very much a serious allegation. Of course, Activision responded by calling that distorted and false. That's not really surprising. You don't really want to go around saying, yeah, okay, we've been sexually harassing our employees. Like, especially for a publicly traded company, you don't want your shareholders to hear that. But yeah, it appears that there is some very strong evidence supporting the fact that the workplace culture in Activision Blizzard was very much toxic. And a lot of people actually wanted Bobby Kotick gone. So as far as I know, at the beginning, when the deal was first announced, Microsoft basically said something along the lines of, we don't really want Bobby Kotick to continue being the head of this company after we acquire them. And so he was just kind of there temporarily until the deal closed. But as we saw, of course, the deal dragged out for so long that he's been at the top for a while now. So Activision, of course, has denied allegations of harassment and that sort of thing. I guess that makes sense. The lawsuit is still ongoing, so these are still allegations. They haven't been proven in court yet. However, there was a report published that did find some significant instances of harassment in Activision, which the company says they addressed. I don't know exactly what they've done. But of course, they've faced a lot of criticism from employees. They even demanded the Kotick resign. Apparently, they even staged a walkout, which, it just shows how serious these allegations are and how serious this issue is and how pervasive it is, in particular, within the company. And it got so bad that even shareholders wrote a letter asking Kotick to resign, given the fact that he was supposedly aware of all of these things happening. That being said, I don't want to say it's not all good news. He is leaving, but of course, as the CEO of a big company, a very major company that's worth quite a bit of money, of course, he's being paid quite a lot. He's getting a $15 million golden parachute, as it's called. If you're not familiar with that term, it's a clause in the contract of CEOs. And by the way, I'm not an expert in any of this. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not familiar with exactly how this stuff works. This is kind of a layman's understanding. But from what I know, it's basically a clause that says, okay, if I ever get fired, if I ever get forced to leave, then you're just going to have to pay me a really big severance package. And of course, that's not even considering all the millions of shares that he holds in Activision Blizzard. Activision Blizzard, as far as I know, I'm actually not sure if it's a publicly traded company or not. I think it is, or rather it was. And the way that these things work is when a private company tries to acquire a public company, they usually acquire it for a higher price than what the market asks. So if I remember correctly, somewhere here there was a mention of the stock price, which was at the time $65, and with the price that Microsoft offered to pay, it was $95. So it's done that way because otherwise you wouldn't really be able to force people to sell their shares, right? But of course, if it's higher, then that's it's legally allowed to proceed that way. And so, of course, that means that all those shares that Kotick owns basically just went up in value by 50%, which means he is going to be making a lot of money from this deal. But he is staying until the end of 2023. So he wanted to stay until the merger is complete. And he has been at Activision for a long time now. He's led the company since 1991, which is 32 years at this point. And so that, he's been in charge of acquisitions like, merging Activision and Blizzard, adding King in there as well, which was finalized in 2016. And he has long been one of the highest paid CEOs in the United States, which of course means that he'll also be getting this big $15 million golden parachute, which, for comparison, other CEOs only receive about 2.6 to 4.1 million, which of course isn't as much, but is still a huge amount of money. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. And Kotick seems to be very, very ruthless when it comes to business, which I suppose makes him somewhat unpopular with gamers. Notoriously, in a presentation in 2010, he said that packaged goods executives take all the fun out of making video games. And he noted that Activision Blizzard succeeded in instilling the culture, the skepticism, and pessimism and fear that you should have in an economy like today. So you can tell this guy really cares about profits and not much else, which, CEOs, it's, I suppose, not too surprising, but it still just shows you exactly the type of person that he is. Of course, he came under fire earlier as well for announcing widespread layoffs despite its record-setting revenue, saying that they weren't realizing their full potential, and apparently full potential means they were paying too many people. Yeah, just a very controversial guy, and I can see why employees wanted him out. Yeah, we can see here that employees are very excited for him to leave, which is understandable, given all the things that have occurred under his leadership. So, of course, here, yeah, we can see Microsoft purchased the company at $95 a share, compared roughly to the $65 a share that it was trading at the time. And of course, Kotick's termination with all of his shares that he owns guarantees him nearly $300 million. So in total, that would be about $375 million now that the acquisition has gone through, which is just a crazy sum of money. Like I can't even imagine having that amount of wealth. That's just completely insane to me. And here's a video. Okay, before we get to the video, Verge, what are you doing with your website? Like, what is this? What is this? Like, was it designed in 2002? Why is it all blue? Anyway, I'll link to this video below, but apparently Bobby Kotick will be focusing on philanthropy after he leaves Activision Blizzard-King, which, the man's turning over a new leaf after being one of the most ruthless business people in the industry. And, after laying off employees and ignoring harassment lawsuits, he's trying to do a bit of good for the world, which, given his history, I'll believe it when I see it, I guess. Yeah, it's... with these things, you really can't tell. You can't tell whether he's genuine, even if he is, until you actually see him actually do something good for the world. It's hard to trust a guy like that, Another interesting addition to the story is that several Activision games were on sale. They were sold for a certain price, and when this deal went through, they suddenly jumped in price by quite a large amount. Now, this story is translated automatically, so it might not be completely accurate, but the gist of it is that several games that are owned by Activision Blizzard have recently had very large price increases. I mean, this is almost a 3 times increase. We've got more than doubling here. And these price increases, in particular, are pretty big. Now, as far as they know, it's only happened on the Brazilian version of Steam. So, for those not familiar, games are typically priced differently in different regions, and that's just to account for the incomes of different regions, right? Like, the US is a fairly rich country. on the world stage, and so games are generally fairly expensive there compared to, say, developing nations where they might be cheaper in order, so that the people who actually live there can afford to buy them. And it seems like this price increase is probably a result of that kind of system. So people on Reddit were saying, yeah, we can see here there are the price increases in Turkey. Over some of these games are over 1,500% more. In India, increases of 25% almost across the board, and of course in Brazil, almost triple as reported in that article. But people on Reddit, and of course, these are just random people, these aren't authoritative sources, but people are saying that these pricing changes are because people are trying to circumvent this kind of regional pricing. So, with VPNs, you can change your apparent location. And so, these services like Steam and, I don't know, Xbox Game Store and whatever, if you use a VPN, they'll think you're located somewhere else. And people have been abusing that in order to get cheaper prices on some of these games. And apparently what some of these companies are doing is, instead of actually figuring out a way to combat that, which, to be fair, is kind of a difficult challenge, right? I mean, VPNs, their whole kind of purpose is to do that, to make it appear that all your internet traffic is coming from a different IP address that might be located in a different part of the world, right? Like, that's kind of their whole business model, is making it difficult to detect that kind of thing. So some publishers are apparently just basically giving up these regions and saying, okay, look, not that many people are buying this game locally, that is, people that actually live within the region. And so, because there are so many people using VPNs to fake their location and to try to get those cheaper prices, you know what? We'll just charge full price at this region. And what that'll do is, we'll lose all the locals that want to buy the game because, there might be in a lower income region and so they can not afford the games anymore. But then we'll also prevent these people from richer parts of the world from using VPNs to try to just get these cheaper deals. Which is kind of unfortunate, right? I mean, the locals kind of get screwed over in that kind of deal. But I guess it's like I said, CEOs, they like making that sort of cold calculation of, you know what, we're screwing over people, but at the end of the day, our profit margins are important, and if we make more money doing it this way, then that's the way we'll do it. Apparently that happened in Poland as well, which, of course, again, this is just some random person on Reddit, not an authoritative source. But apparently games used to cost a fairly cheap amount, but because people have been doing this kind of VPN trickery, the games are now double, which is actually around $83, which in fact is even more expensive than games in the United States. Which I'm not sure why they would go that far. I mean, presumably if people in the United States are using VPNs, then surely just setting the price to be equal to the US is, that seems like a reasonable way to curb that issue. I mean, if it's the same price, why would you bother? But I guess there are some regions where the games are priced even higher than the United States, and I don't know whether that's due to, taxes or import fees or that sort of thing, or maybe it's just, like, I don't know, small countries like Monaco or something where just because the population is so low, the average income is like super high, and I guess they can charge really high prices there. I don't know. I have no idea. And the last thing that I wanted to go over is the fact that why Microsoft paid so much. I mean, $70 billion, like, that's a massive amount of money, right? If we go back to these other studios and publishers and developers that Microsoft acquired, even when they acquired ZeniMax, which is mostly well-known as the parent company of Bethesda, at the time, $7.5 billion was considered kind of a crazy amount for gaming. Like, that was almost, I don't want to say unheard of, but it was a very big acquisition, and people were saying like, "Whoa, this is a huge shift for the industry, right? This is a massive, massive purchase." And even with Mojang being bought out for what 2.5 billion, people were like, "Wow, this is a very significant acquisition." This is a lot of money that Microsoft is spending, and now almost 70 billion, 68.7 billion dollars. That just completely dwarfs all the other acquisitions, like even combined, right? Uh, I mean, this is definitely the biggest acquisition in the history of the games industry, and like even just for Microsoft as a whole company, right? They're $1 trillion company, but even for $1 trillion company, $68.7 billion is nothing to sneeze at. And the reason for that is the reason for them paying so much and for seeing so much potential here is that video games are big business now. I mean, let's look at this chart. So the latest data in this chart is from 2021. Unfortunately, it's not the most up to date. Everything after 2021 is just projections for the future. But even in 2021, the total revenue of the games industry was over $200 billion per year, that is a very big industry, right? And it's been seeing consistent growth. Now, as you know, I'm a PC gamer, and something that I found quite interesting that I wasn't really expecting is just how big mobile gaming is. I mean, you look at these different segments, right? Let's look at PC games and console games. PC games from 2017 to 2021 grew from 25.5 to $33.7 billion, which is some modest growth. It's I guess that's respectable. Same thing with consoles. 23.8 to 28. That's again decent growth, but nothing that's earth shattering. But social and casual gaming, which as I understand it is mostly mobile games, that's really the segment that's seeing all the big growth nowadays. I mean, it's more than doubled from 2017 to 2021. And just looking at these projections, really that's where all the future growth is going to be, it seems like, at least according to these predictions by these experts. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, King is a very big part of the Activision Blizzard portfolio, right? They make up over 30% of revenue, and I guess the view is that in the future, this is going to get a lot bigger. And even with Blizzard too, right? I mean, look at their recent games. They put out Diablo 4, but really their big moneymaker at this point was Diablo Immortal, which was a mobile game with just infamously terrible, completely pay to win, and just very predatory monetization mechanics, which, it was universally hated for that. But at the end of the day, that's where they're making most of their money from. Like, that's just simply more profitable than it is to develop games for PC or to develop games even for mobile with fair monetization practices. So it looks like, I don't want to say the quality of games isn't getting better. I think there's room for debate in that, but it looks like the real change in the industry is just in terms of how aggressively things are monetized. Like, they're already pretty darn monetized these days with loot boxes and skins and battle passes and just all sorts of things that we didn't really see much of in the industry 10 years ago. I mean, not to go off on a tangent here, but people really praise Valve for being, very fair with their practices. Valve kind of started the loot box phenomenon, this whole trend of gambling real money on cosmetic items in games. With Counter-Strike Go had their cases, and of course they still do, and that's realistically how they make most of their money at this point. Just in terms of Counter-Strike, I'm not talking about Valve as a whole. And Team Fortress 2 as well. And back then people were okay with it, but nowadays it's really everywhere. Like, so many games are monetized in very aggressive ways that gaming is just, it seems to not be as fun as it once was. It seems like these big companies, they realize that they can earn a lot of money. And once they realize that, unfortunately, I don't think there's any way to go back from that. Changing consumer behavior about these things and getting people to not buy skins and not pay for in-game items it's hard, and I don't think realistically that's going to happen anytime soon. Which means this number is just going to keep growing. Games are going to keep being monetized in very aggressive, predatory, anti-consumer ways, and these companies are just going to keep making a lot of money doing so. And why wouldn't they? So my feelings on this acquisition are mixed. I think just looking at this graph, looking at the IP that Activision Blizzard King owns, all the different games that they have, Microsoft is going to be in a very dominant position over the industry. And so I'm not particularly optimistic about its future. But at the same time, I don't think this is, the end of the industry and everything's going to be a Microsoft monopoly. I don't think we're going to have to bow down to our overlords soon. But you know what? In the future, who knows?